The two-story house on Maple Street in suburban Ohio was bathed in warm autumn sunlight. This home belonged to the Miller family. Rachel Miller was a nurse at the local St. Mary's Hospital, where she had been caring for patients for over 10 years. Despite her petite frame, she had a strong character and was highly trusted by her colleagues. Her husband David was an architect specializing in residential design, running a well-regarded architectural firm in the area. They had met 7 years ago at a friend's wedding, dated for a year, and then married. For Rachel, David was the ideal partner. He shared household duties, was actively involved in child rearing, and most importantly, understood and supported her work. Their treasure was their 5-year-old daughter Emma. With blonde hair and blue eyes, Emma was a lively girl who combined her father's gentle nature with her mother's strong will. She attended the local kindergarten and loved drawing and reading books. She often said she wanted to become a doctor and help everyone. Every time Rachel heard those words, her heart felt warm. A change came to this peaceful household 6 months ago when David's mother Margaret moved in with them. Margaret had worked as an elementary school teacher for 40 years and was beloved by the children in the community. After losing her husband 3 years ago, she had been living alone, but when her knees started bothering her, she came to live with her son's family. On the surface, Margaret was an ideal mother-in-law. She was an excellent cook and took good care of Emma. She was friendly with the neighbors and actively participated in church activities. David was genuinely delighted by his mother's presence, and Emma was fond of her grandma. However, Rachel felt an inexplicable unease. While Margaret appeared kind on the surface, she sometimes detected coldness in her gaze. Particularly when Rachel was having intimate conversations with David or when they were spending family time together, Rachel didn't miss how Margaret's expression would momentarily cloud over. Furthermore, Margaret frequently talked about how things were better in the old days. She sometimes brought up stories about David's first wife. His former wife Sarah had died of illness 5 years ago, but Margaret repeatedly said, "Sarah was such a good girl." Rachel showed understanding on the surface, but internally harbored complex feelings. Margaret was especially fond of her granddaughter Emma. She bought new toys and books almost daily, carefully brushed Emma's hair, and often gave her baths. When Rachel was absent for night shifts, Margaret would take complete care of Emma. David was pleased, saying, "It's really helpful that Mother came," and Rachel was grateful too. However, recently there had been subtle changes in Emma's behavior. She wasn't as energetic as before and sometimes seemed lost in thought. The kindergarten teacher had also mentioned that she seems a little tired. Rachel, busy with work, hadn't taken her daughter's changes seriously. During this time, Rachel's work at the hospital had become particularly busy. Patient numbers increased from fall into winter, and she had more night shifts. When she came home, she was exhausted and often couldn't spend enough time with her family. Margaret's presence was certainly helpful during such times. However, Rachel also felt anxiety that she was gradually losing her role in the household. David hadn't noticed his wife's anxiety. He thought that having his mother there reduced the household burden and allowed him to support his wife's career. To him, his mother was simply a normal woman who loved her son, and there was no reason to doubt her. The seemingly peaceful daily life of the Miller family was actually balanced on a delicate equilibrium. And without anyone noticing, that balance was slowly beginning to crumble. In early October, Rachel noticed a change in her daughter's hair. Emma's blonde hair, which usually shone brilliantly, somehow looked dry and brittle. During their morning routine, it seemed to tangle more easily when she brushed it. "Emma, your hair doesn't seem to be in good condition lately," Rachel said, gently stroking her daughter's hair. "It feels kind of rough," Emma answered, looking in the mirror. "But Grandma uses a special shampoo on me, so it's okay." Just then, Margaret's voice came from the kitchen. "Rachel, don't worry about Emma's hair. I found a good hair treatment." Margaret appeared holding a small bottle. The product had an expensive-looking label from a brand Rachel had never seen. This is a special treatment for children. My friend who's a hairdresser recommended it. I think it will suit Emma's hair type, Margaret explained with a confident expression. Rachel took the bottle and tried to read the ingredient list, but the text was too small to read easily. Thank you, Margaret. But before using it on a child's hair, could I look into it a bit more? Of course. But my friend has been a professional hairdresser for 40 years. She's trustworthy, Margaret's voice carried a slight tone of displeasure. That evening, Rachel was working the night shift. Before leaving home, she asked David and Margaret to take care of Emma. Recently, such night shifts had been increasing. The hospital was facing a serious nursing shortage, and experienced staff like Rachel were being given more responsibilities. The next morning when she returned home, Emma had already left for kindergarten. While cleaning up from breakfast, Margaret reported, "Last night Emma and I had a nice long bath together. When I used that treatment, her hair became very smooth." Rachel felt relieved. Thanks to Margaret's care, her daughter's hair problem seemed to be resolving. For her, exhausted from work, her mother-in-law's help was truly appreciated. However, a few days later, Emma said something strange. "Mama, Grandma's shampoo smells funny." Rachel became worried, but just then she received an emergency call from the hospital. A patient's condition had suddenly deteriorated, and she had to rush there immediately. "I'll check it later," she told Emma and hurried out of the house. However, she had to stay at the hospital late that night too, and when she returned home, Emma was already asleep. Margaret told her, "I gave her a bath tonight too, so don't worry." While Rachel expressed her gratitude, she felt somehow unsettled. On the weekend, Rachel was finally able to spend time alone with Emma. When she tried to take a bath with her daughter, Emma showed a slightly hesitant expression. "What's wrong, Emma?" "Grandma said that since Mama is tired from work, she would give me baths." Rachel felt conflicted. She was indeed tired from work, but she felt as if her time with her daughter was being taken away. However, she reconsidered, thinking it would be rude to doubt Margaret's kindness. In the bath, Rachel washed Emma's hair and checked its texture. It seemed thinner than before, but she couldn't be certain. She told herself that children's hair can change with the seasons. "Mama, is my hair okay?" Emma asked anxiously. "It's fine, Emma. It's probably just the change of seasons. Grandma's treatment will start working," Rachel answered with a smile to reassure her daughter. However, internally, a small anxiety was growing. Recently, Emma didn't seem as lively as before and appeared to tire more easily. The kindergarten teacher had also said she seems listless many days. Rachel tried to think of her daughter's changes as part of adapting to a new environment or the growing process. That night, she discussed it with David. "Is there anything about Emma's condition that concerns you?" Rachel asked. "Not particularly. Ever since Mother came, Emma has been well taken care of," David answered. "You can concentrate on work now, can't you?" Rachel nodded, but couldn't put into words the anxiety she felt deep in her heart. Her husband completely trusted his mother, and she had no clear reason to explain the unease she was feeling. The following week, Rachel was scheduled for consecutive night shifts again. At the hospital, new patients were brought in one after another, and her expertise and experience were in demand. Balancing home and work was extremely difficult, but Margaret's presence helped maintain some balance. However, on Thursday morning, when she returned from work as usual, she discovered several strands of hair on Emma's pillow. Rachel's heart nearly stopped. It wasn't normal for a child to lose hair while sleeping. "Margaret, I need to discuss Emma's hair with you," Rachel called to her mother-in-law. "What is it?" Margaret turned around, but a momentary look of confusion crossed her face. There was hair on the pillow. "Is this normal? Children's hair falls out easily. But if you're worried, why don't you consult a pediatrician?" Margaret's answer was logical, but Rachel felt something wasn't quite right. That afternoon, Rachel called the pediatrician. The doctor explained that stress or environmental changes can cause temporary hair loss, but also said, if it continues, she should be examined. Rachel felt somewhat relieved but decided to observe her daughter's changes carefully. However, due to work busyness and fatigue, this resolve gradually faded. The situation continued where she had to rely on Margaret's devoted care. At the end of October, while preparing for Halloween, Emma complained that, "My hair feels prickly." When Rachel looked, her daughter's hair was clearly thinner than before. But just then, she received another emergency call from the hospital and couldn't investigate further. "I'll check later, Emma." Rachel kissed her daughter and left the house. She remembered Margaret saying, "Don't worry, I'll give Emma's hair special care." Looking back, the changes had already begun by this time. However, Rachel was unable to trust her instincts due to her busyness and consideration for her mother-in-law. On Saturday morning, Rachel was awakened by her daughter's scream. Looking at the clock, it was just past 7 a.m. Last night she had been able to come home early for once, and the family had enjoyed a leisurely dinner together. Therefore, she had planned to sleep in this morning. "Mama! Mama!" Emma's voice trembled with terror. Rachel jumped up and rushed to her daughter's room. Emma was sitting on the bed crying. At that moment, Rachel's heart nearly stopped. Hair was scattered all over her daughter's pillow and sheets. It looked as if someone had torn hair from a doll. "Mama, my hair fell out," Emma said in a trembling voice. The moment Rachel looked up at Emma's face, the world stopped. Her daughter's head was completely bald. The hair that had definitely been there last night was gone without a single strand remaining. Emma's blue eyes were filled with tears, and her small face was distorted with fear. "Emma, it's okay," Rachel embraced her daughter with trembling hands. However, she herself was in a state of panic. As a nurse, she had seen many patients, but she had never heard of a healthy 5-year-old child completely losing all hair overnight. "Does it hurt? Is there any pain anywhere?" Rachel carefully examined her daughter's scalp. There was no redness or swelling, no signs of trauma. But that made it even more eerie. David, who had been sleeping in the next room, also rushed over upon hearing the commotion. He started to say, "What happened?" but lost his words when he saw Emma. "We need to go to the hospital immediately," Rachel said to her husband. "This is an emergency." Margaret also came upstairs from downstairs. She entered the room asking, "What's wrong?" and showed a shocked expression when she saw Emma. "Oh my, what a terrible thing. Poor Emma." 30 minutes later, the Miller family was in the emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital. Rachel found herself having her daughter examined by colleagues at the hospital where she also worked. Emma huddled on Rachel's lap. Although she had a towel wrapped around her head, she seemed bothered by the stares of people around her. Dr. Anderson, the pediatrician on duty, examined Emma. He was also Rachel's colleague and a trustworthy doctor. "When did you first notice abnormalities with her hair?" Dr. Anderson began a detailed interview. "I thought her hair had been dry for the past few weeks. But I never imagined this would happen," Rachel answered. "Last night everything was normal. When she woke up this morning, she was in this condition." The doctor carefully observed Emma's scalp and examined it thoroughly using a magnifying glass. There are no signs of inflammation or infection on the scalp. The hair follicles don't appear to be damaged either. "Then why did this happen?" David asked anxiously. "There are several possibilities," Dr. Anderson explained carefully. "Stress-related alopecia, autoimmune disease, infection, and there's also the possibility of chemical-induced hair loss." "Chemicals?" Rachel repeated. "Yes. When exposed to strong chemical agents, this kind of sudden hair loss can occur. We need to do blood tests and hair analysis." While waiting for blood test results, Emma rested in the pediatric ward. Rachel sat by her daughter's bedside, holding her small hand. Emma was sleeping from exhaustion, but occasionally stirred restlessly as if having nightmares. 2 hours later, Dr. Anderson returned. His expression was serious. The blood test results show traces of toxic substances. Specifically, traces of chemicals used in hair removal products. Rachel and David looked at each other. Hair removal products? We don't have anything like that at home, David declared. However, Emma has definitely been exposed to these substances. Continuously and in large amounts, the doctor continued in a serious tone. Such chemicals are usually mixed into shampoos or treatments. Rachel remembered Emma's words. Grandma's shampoo smells funny. Why hadn't she taken her daughter's complaint seriously? I recommend having all toiletries in the house tested, Dr. Anderson continued. And when there's a possibility of intentional poisoning like this, reporting to the police should also be considered. Police? David was shocked. Surely no one would deliberately. Unfortunately, accidental exposure to this amount of hair removal chemicals is unlikely. The doctor's words confronted the family with a heavy reality. On the drive home from the hospital, the car was enveloped in heavy silence. Emma was sleeping in the back seat, and Rachel and David didn't know what to say. Who would do this, and why? David finally spoke. When they arrived home, Margaret greeted them with a worried expression. How is Emma? What did the doctor say? The test results showed it was chemical-induced hair loss, Rachel said, looking into her mother-in-law's eyes. We need to examine all the toiletries in the house. Oh my, how terrible. But I'm glad the cause was found. It must be some kind of mistake. That night, Emma slept in her parents' bed. Rachel gazed at her daughter's sleeping face while battling the growing suspicion within herself. The doctor's words wouldn't leave her mind. On Monday morning, Rachel was packing all the toiletries in the house into large bags. Following Dr. Anderson's instructions, she would submit all shampoos, conditioners, soaps, and lotions that Emma might have used to the hospital laboratory for testing. Is this really necessary? David was confused. Surely there was just a defect in some product. I can't believe someone deliberately harmed Emma. Rachel understood her husband's feelings. She wanted to think the same way. However, her experience as a nurse told her how abnormal this situation was. It was impossible for a healthy child to accidentally be exposed to enough chemicals to cause complete hair loss overnight. If the tests show nothing, then we can feel reassured, Rachel persuaded her husband. It's for Emma's safety. Margaret was up earlier than usual that morning. While preparing breakfast in the kitchen, she occasionally showed an anxious expression. When will the test results be available? She asked. They said it would take 3 to 4 days, Rachel answered. Until then, I'll handle all of Emma's baths myself. Margaret's hand stopped for a moment. Of course. But you have work too, and you're tired. If there's anything I can help with. No, I'm fine, Rachel's response sounded somewhat cold. That day, Rachel left work early and went around to pharmacies alone. She wanted to research Emma's symptoms. At the third pharmacy, she learned a shocking fact. I'd like to check purchase records for hair removal cream, Rachel consulted with the pharmacist. My daughter suffered chemical-induced hair loss, and I'm trying to find the cause. The pharmacist was sympathetic. I'm so sorry to hear that. Let me check records of anyone who recently purchased such products. The pharmacist's expression changed as he looked at the computer screen. You're Ms. Miller, aren't you? From this address? Yes. Actually, large quantities of hair removal cream have been purchased from this address from last month through this month. The purchaser is Margaret Miller. Rachel's blood drained from her face. How much? far exceeding normal usage amounts. It appears over 10 tubes were purchased. The pharmacist was confused. That's a dangerous amount to use at once. Rachel took a copy of the purchase records with trembling hands. On the drive home, she reviewed the records in the car. All purchase dates coincided with days when she had worked night shifts. The days when Margaret had been in charge of Emma's baths. When she got home, David had returned from work. Rachel reported her discovery at the pharmacy to her husband. David couldn't believe it at first. "Mother, that's impossible, she would never do such a thing," he shook his head. "It must be some mistake. Someone must have used Mother's name." David, face reality, Rachel desperately tried to persuade her husband. "Emma said, Grandma's shampoo smells funny." We ignored it. Just then, Emma came downstairs. She was wearing a colorful knit hat on her head. It was something Margaret had bought for her. "Daddy, Mommy, what are you talking about?" Emma asked innocently. Rachel hugged her daughter. "It's nothing, Emma. We were just having grown-up talk." At dinner time, Margaret showed her usual consideration. "Emma, your hair will surely grow back soon. Don't worry." David stared at his mother. He didn't completely believe Rachel's story, but seeds of doubt had been planted. That night, after Emma fell asleep, David decided to talk with his mother. Rachel listened from the next room. "Mother, I have something to ask you about Emma," David carefully began. "What is it?" Margaret answered while knitting. "Is it true that you bought large quantities of hair removal cream at the pharmacy?" Margaret's hand stopped. After a long silence, she answered. "I'm bothered by unwanted hair as I age." "Is there a problem with that?" "More than 10 tubes." David pressed. "Why are you interrogating me about my personal shopping?" Irritation crept into Margaret's voice. Just then, Emma talked in her sleep. "Grandma, don't use that, it hurts." All three froze. Rachel quickly went to Emma's room and picked up a small diary by her daughter's pillow. 5-year-old Emma had recently learned to keep a diary with pictures and simple words. Turning the pages, she found records in childish drawings and letters. "Grandma always uses a different bottle when washing hair. Head feels prickly. Strange smell." Rachel returned to the living room with the diary. "Look at this," she showed it to David and Margaret. Margaret's face turned pale. "A child's imagination. That's no proof of anything." "Mother," David's voice was shaking. "Tell me the truth. What did you do to Emma?" Margaret remained silent for a while, but eventually opened her mouth as if giving up. I didn't want to lose you." "What? Do you remember Sarah? Your first wife?" Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes. "She was healthy at first too. But David was horrified. "Mother, surely not. I did the same thing to Sarah. I gradually mixed it into her cosmetics. So it would seem like a skin disease. So she would leave you," Margaret confessed through tears. "But Sarah died. I never meant for that to happen." Rachel's body shook with terror. Sarah's cause of death had been listed as unknown autoimmune disease, but it had actually been long-term poisoning by her mother-in-law. And now Rachel and Emma, David was in despair. "Rachel took you away from me," Margaret continued with a crazed expression. "But I thought if I worked through Emma, you would come back to me. If the daughter became sick, Rachel would quit her job, and you would rely on me. We could be a family again. Emma is your granddaughter. You poisoned your own granddaughter?" David shouted. "Just a little at a time. I didn't mean to kill her. I just thought if she lost her hair, Rachel would be upset and turn to you for help." Margaret's logic was completely broken. Rachel took out her cell phone with trembling hands. I'm calling the police. Please, don't involve my son with the police, Margaret pleaded. I'll leave the house. I'll never come near you again. David was in deep shock, speechless. He couldn't accept the reality that his beloved mother had harmed his wife and daughter, and even his former wife. Mother, you're sick. You need treatment, he finally spoke. But you need to leave the house right now. Emma's safety is the top priority. That night, Margaret packed her belongings and left the house. 1 year later in the fall, Emma's hair was slowly beginning to grow back. It was still short, but it had regained a healthy shine. Standing in front of the mirror, stroking her hair, she asked, "Mama, is my hair getting prettier?" "Very pretty, Emma," Rachel hugged her daughter. "You're really a strong girl." After leaving the house, Margaret had moved to a senior apartment. David had considered putting his mother in a facility, but first chose separation. Margaret began receiving counseling from a psychiatrist and was making efforts to confront her behavior. During the first few months, David suffered from deep guilt. He continued to blame himself for not noticing his mother's abnormal behavior and for putting his wife and daughter in danger. Rachel supported her husband while they also attended family therapy. The counselor repeatedly said, "You're not responsible," but David's emotional wounds were deep. For Rachel too, completely forgiving Margaret was difficult. The act of harming her beloved daughter could never be forgotten. However, as time passed, she came to understand that Margaret was also a victim of pathological love. Her obsession with her son had grown from loneliness and anxiety. Emma showed remarkable resilience. Initially she suffered from trauma, but gradually regained her energy through her parents' love and appropriate counseling. She sometimes asked, "Why did Grandma do bad things?" but Rachel and David explained carefully according to her age level. 6 months later, a letter of apology arrived from Margaret. It contained deep regret for her actions and reflection on expressing her love for the family in the wrong way. The words, "I loved Emma and Rachel, but I expressed that love in the wrong way. Fear of losing my son drove me mad," were particularly striking. After long deliberation, David decided to allow supervised visits. Once a month, under a counselor's supervision, they would meet with Margaret for short periods. At the first visit, Margaret bowed deeply to Emma. "Emma, Grandma did something truly terrible. I don't expect to be forgiven. But I want to apologize from my heart." Emma was initially confused but asked, "Grandma was sick, right? Are you better now?" At that pure question, Margaret shed tears. Rachel didn't attend the visits but watched the attempts to gradually rebuild the relationship. It might be impossible to completely restore trust, but it might be possible to maintain a minimal relationship as family. On Christmas morning, 3 place settings were arranged on the Miller family's dining table. Emma was wearing a new headband and happily eating pancakes. Since her hair was still short, she had learned to decorate herself cutely with accessories. "By this time next year, your hair will be long too," Rachel said, and Emma nodded with a smile. David looked at his wife and daughter while thinking about the true meaning of family. He had learned that family wasn't just about blood relations, but about relationships where people respect each other and nurture healthy love. His mother's distorted love had nearly destroyed the family. However, through that experience, they were able to build true bonds. "Daddy, what are we doing today?" Emma asked. "Shall we build a snowman with you?" David answered. "Mama too." The 3 of them took hands and went outside. In the snowy garden, they began creating new memories. The wounds of the past might never completely heal, but they had found the strength to continue walking toward the future. They deeply understood that family begins with expressing love in healthy ways and respecting each other's boundaries.